All right, this is One Last Midnight. Welcome back to another episode of Programming in C#, a beginner's course. In this episode, we're going to look at the basics, getting started with the IDE. Now, IDE what? Right. The IDE is your first acronym in programming. It stands for Integrated Development Environment. And simply put, it is the tool you're going to use to create any of your applications. So if I was a writer, I would be using a pencil or a pen, maybe Microsoft Word. Since I'm a programmer, I use an IDE. Now, not all IDEs are the same. Some have more features, some have less features. And there are several that are free. And we're going to be using a free one because, why pay? So the types of IDEs that we're going to look at, there's several that you can use, and one of these three will be sufficient to be able to use, and they're all free. So first we're going to look at Visual Studio. Now Visual Studio, there is a community edition that you can download, which is 100% free, and it runs on Windows and Mac. So no problem if you have Windows and Mac. Now, if you have a Linux, there's something called Visual Studio Code. That also runs on Windows and Mac as well, but it's kind of a lesser version of Visual Studio. It's got less features. And then there's also MonoDevelop. Now, MonoDevelop is another IDE that's not put out by Microsoft. It's an open source IDE, and it's available for Windows, Linux, and Mac. Now, which one to use, right? Because that's a great question. Well, in this course, we're going to be using the Visual Studio Community Edition. Now, like I said, it's available for Windows and Macs. It's 100% free. You can actually even use this to build commercial applications on. And it's feature rich. It's got tons of features in there that are extremely helpful for you as a beginning developer because it'll help you learn how to develop. And I've been using Visual Studio all the way back from the first edition of Visual Studio when it was called Visual InterDev. Installing Visual Studio is easy. So go to Visual Studio Microsoft.com downloads and look for the Community Edition. It'll be the first one on the list. Download it and follow the instruction setup points. It's not that hard. I mean, it walks you through it. When you get to the point where it asks you to select workloads, just select what I have selected. Okay, so for the final steps, once you have this all completed and all installed, we're going to do a couple things really quick. First, we want to start a Visual Studio, and then we want to change the default project location. Why? Because it's just simpler that way. I mean, Microsoft tries to put it on your user drive. I personally like to have it in a different location so that I know where everything is located. And the last thing we want to do is we want to change the color theme. So let's go ahead and let's do that right now. All right, get Visual Studio started up. I happen to have a nice little handy icon on my desktop for that. When you start it up, you're going to see the starting intro screen, and then you're going to come to this screen. Now, at this point in time, what I want you to do is just forget this, and let's just click on this, continue without code. When you continue without code, you're going to go into the IDE. You're going to go into Visual Studio, and you're not going to have anything loaded, which is fine. We don't want to deal with anything at this point. Let's go up to Tools and go to Options. And here under Options, I want you to search for Location. And we're going to click Projects and Solutions, Location. Now, this is what we want to change. We want to change the project location. So find somewhere, I have on my D drive a folder called Projects, and in my folder called Projects, I've created another folder called One Last Midnight Codes. And in there is where all the projects we're going to do for this course are going to be located. It's just a clean way to set it up. I know that if I have any programming projects, it's always going to be under Projects, and it's probably going to be under a subdirectory underneath that to keep it all organized and configured. So find a location of where you can place your projects. By default, it's going to go into your user location and like documents or something. And I just don't care for it in there personally, but you can leave it alone if you want to. The other thing we want to do while we're here is we want to change the color scheme. Now, you'll notice that my color scheme is set to dark. You see, if you go under environmental, get rid of the location and then scroll up and go to environmental, and you'll see that the color scheme is set to dark. If you don't care for a dark theme, there are light themes. You have to change it and then click OK. and then it'll change your color theme for you. To me, this is too stark. If you're looking at this on a day-to-day basis, it's a little too bright, but it's your own personal preference. Like I said, I prefer the dark theme. Okay, with all this complete, now it's actually time to create our first application. And what are we going to be doing? We're going to be building a trivia application. And that is going to be a console application. Now, if you haven't seen a console application, it's like the old DOS programs. So you can see this. This is an example. It's something you're familiar with if you've seen an old DOS program before. Now you're saying to yourself, oh, Midnight, why can't we create something cooler like... Well, you can't because you're a beginner.
It's not fair.
You just stop whining. We really all have to start right here in a console application because it is very simple to get started on. It's very easy to print out to your screen and show the application. And there's not a lot of controls to it, so it makes it quite simple. We can focus on coding instead of having to worry about other things. But we'll get into more difficult projects later. So moving back to Visual Studio, right where we left off, we had closed down the options screen. I want you to click this little blue house on the toolbar, and that takes you back to the start window. This is what you get when you first start Visual Studio. And it's helpful because it's going to show you projects that in this area right here that you've already started working on, and it's going to allow you to do other things on the right-hand side, one of the things we want to do is create a new project. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a new project. And what we want is a console application. So just type in console and you'll see the list of console applications. It'll find console applications for you. Now, if you installed correctly and you chose all of your workloads correctly, you'll find a console application that says .NET Core. We're going to click on that and we're going to click Next. If you changed your location, you'll see your new location listed in the location area. And we need to name our project. And we're just going to call this really quick Console Trivia Game. Now, it also created a solution of the same name. It's going to create a project of the same name. That's fine. Don't worry about that for now. Later, we can have the solution be a different name than the project. But in this particular project, in this course, there's no need to change this. We can keep them the same. And then you're going to hit Create. After your project is created, you're going to come to this screen where it has a tab that says program.cs, and you're going to see some code. Let me go ahead and zoom this code up for you. Now, we already have an application. It's already configured. If we were to hit this run button right here, it would fire up and we would produce a console debugging window that says hello world. That was our program. So if you notice in the code here, our code says hello world. The program says hello world. This other bit is letting you know that you are in the debugger, and to close the window, we're just gonna hit any key and it'll automatically close the window for us. All right, but before we go any further, we need to talk about the namespace statement and we need to talk about the class statement. So the namespace statement is, you need to think of it as, an organizational system. That's mainly what it's used for. It's used to classify elements within your program so that when you expose it to other programs or other applications, there's some sort of hierarchy to it, right? There's an organization system to it. And the best way to think about this, to simplify it, is to think of an organization chart. Now let's talk about the class statement. Man, the only thing I can say about that is...
Forget about it.
Look, the class statement we'll get into later, but look, it declares the name of a class. Classes are maybe 3 or 4 lessons down the road. They also contain definitions for variables and properties, events and methods, and all of these things you're going to learn about before you even learn about classes. So again,
forget about it.
So now that you know a little bit about the namespace statement and the class statement, let's look at this block of code and try to understand what it's saying here. As you can see, the namespace is defined up here on the top, and then you'll see little brackets. That means anything contained within inside of those brackets is going to be within this namespace. Again, we see the class statement, and it's called program. It has a name. And you can see as I hover over it, it says console trivia game, which is the namespace .program. That's defining the hierarchy, like I said, organizational chart, right? So you have the president and then you have the vice president. in its very simplest terms. And that is also included in brackets, meaning anything inside of these brackets will be contained inside of this class statement. Finally, we have a method. I'll get more into methods again. Methods were something that we were going to cover later. But what's important is any code within the brackets for the method is what's going to run. Now, because this is the main method, it's the first method that's called when the program starts. This is what's going to execute immediately. So that's the structure that most code files are going to take. Namespace, class, some sort of something in the middle of class, right? Could be methods, could be properties, could be events. We'll get into those later. Let's just focus on this one line because that's all we're going to do for today's lesson is focus on this one line. Now this line says that to write out to the console, hello world in a string. If you notice console's in blue because console is actually a class. It allows for input, output, and error streams for the console application. Console does more than just write line, but let's just focus on write line. So let's change this from hello world to I just made my first program. And let's copy and paste this line. And then we'll just put woot. And so what do you think you expect when this application runs? Well, reading the code, what I expect to have happen is it's going to print out this first line, and then it'll print out this second line right underneath it. Write line is writing a whole line, which means it also includes the terminator, which happens to be a carriage return. So let's go ahead and test that. Let's run it. When the application loads up and you see the console window, there you go. You see it just made my first, well, okay, I can't spell, but just made my first program, woot. Okay, so here's a great example of going back and fixing a problem. Made my first program, exclamation point or period, and woot. And if we run it again, then we'll actually get the change that we made. There it is. Again, don't worry about this last bit. This is put out by the debugger. All right, so now it's time for the challenge. So see if you can, this is going to be a trivia game, right? So see if you can extend the program out a little bit. We're just using write line, like we learned with write line. Let's see if you can write to the console, maybe the game title, come up with the game title, write it out. Come up with the description of the game, what you're trying to accomplish with your trivia game, and maybe put some author information and copyright information. All right, so that was it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button. If you're not subscribers, please subscribe. We've got a great community of people here. If you want to follow me on my social media, you can find all the links in the description below. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I go live and when I post new videos. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.